At the beginning of the class, actually, I submit to you the question asking you what are the pillars responsible for helping us to design a web solution. A web solution, actually, we mean web application, web mobile application, anything that we can deliver over the web as a service, So it is considered to be a web solution. What are the pillars? Remember that we finished three main topics up to now, which are the ASP.NET, the databases, which is the SQL Server in background, and the Arrow.NET, the passerelle or the gateway or the path that we might build to link the background, the SQL Server, let's say data or whatever, to the front end web pages, which are the ASP.NET. Those are the main pillars. The answer to the question, very easy actually. The ASP.NET for front-end solutions, for front-end pages. SQL Server for the back-end solutions or services. Arrow.NET to link. Very easy. So the answer to the question, ASP.NET, SQL Server, Arrow.NET. What are the pillars? The pillars, they are those three so far. Actually, this is not the unique technology. Remember that we are following the Microsoft technology, no more, no less. What we are going to do today, and this unit number 4, it is to declare how to populate controls or how to populate views in the front end web pages or web solutions or whatever. Are you able to hear me? Are you able to see the screen, please? Is it still visible to you, the screen?
Yes.
Yes, great. So the binden, the data binden, it is a context of, actually, as per literally speaking, the definition of what is binden, it is to make a link that helps data to pass, to go through, in, out, binden, to bind, in this regard. So data binden here, since we passed through the unit Arrow.NET, so what's the difference? The difference is actually we are going to tackle how to populate. The Arrow.NET is the path that links what we saw in chapter number 3. If I just make you come back here to this chapter number 3, let me just tackle the title, the first slide. It got stuck. Yes, here it is. So the unit, no, yeah, this is the Arrow.NET. Actually, it is to help us to build a link, a path from the front-end interfaces to the back-end solutions through a gateway, through an interface, through a layer that comes in between. Yeah, so what's the difference in between this Arrow.NET and this binden, the data binden? Context of data binden here would help us to populate data. We will see the methodologies how to populate data and the sense of how to display, how to make a data display, how to finalize, because linking the interface to the backend solution is not the end of the story. Okay, the user does not understand and he does not bother himself about being linked or not. But what is the serves? What are the values? What is the data? Full stop. This is what the end user is concerned of, and this is what the service providers from the other side, what are they actually concerned of? They have to see the services being displayed to the end users, to the service consumers, and this is the role of this data binden. This is the role of this data binden. So how to succeed in connecting and displaying and populating, let's say, the controls or whatever views we have. See what I'm using, the controls or views. Let's dig in. Let's dig in and let's. Actually, this is exactly what I was describing and what I was defining the data binden. It is how to, let's say, populate controls and views. It means what we are going to display at the end of the day in the front end interfaces, no more, no less. Remember, controls or views, they are components in plural that they can be actually integrated in just one interface, in just one web interface. Means in one interface we might have more than one control at the same time, and they might be actually populated from different resources or from different data sources in background, which is here exactly explained that you are going to specify how you are going to display your data in the front end interface. So the data binder will help us do that. This context is dynamic, it's not static, means we're going to make things be displayed, yes, from background, yes, but it's not a static value to display. So it can be done dynamically, and it is to be dynamic because we are going to display profiles, we are going to display data related to objects that we are going to instantiate. So an object, for example, a user profile, you as a student. So the same interface will display the name and the ID and the, let's say, major and grades and GPAs. So the same interface, but displays different values because users, they are different. So dynamically displaying content. To make you understand more, exactly what we saw in those few minutes. They are only a sort of theoretical definition of what is a data binder. But here in real plane, what is a data binder? Clearly to define technically here, we are going to describe in a real plane. It is a context of populate and control using two methodologies. We are going to refer to the way how to specify the data source where it is, and then after to populate by using or by calling a method which is a data bin. So two, let's say, components we are going to refer to finalize the binding behavior. And the binding behavior, remember, it is a population of it is a population, yes, or populating a control. To do so, we are going to refer to two components which are a property to specify the data source where it is, and a method to call to do the binding, to populate. So those two, let's say, components, they are the responsible parties for finalizing the binding. This process, it has to be actually tackled and done in a specific area in the program. It's not anywhere. Remember, the event handlers we defined in the first unit. The event handlers, they are places where we are going to finalize the binding. Mainly, we talk about the page load. What does it mean? It means actually, as first the user opens the page, when loading the components, there only the binding would happen. Not only, we are using the word usually here. Why? Because we might call or do the binding even after loading a control to update, for example, or an update after a click or after a mouse over or something like that, or a second load. We might talk about a binding. So mainly it is for populating data when loaded, but it's not only. At this level, any questions, please?
No.
Okay, we continue. Okay, the controls that we might refer to be populated using the bin technology, they are so many and they are numerous. All the controls we know they are valid for being populated using the bin methodology. Those are title of those are as the title of example only. They are not a restriction. Means the list box or whatever, the radio button or whatever we are seen in front of us, they are only title of examples of control that we might populate using the binding process or binding behavior. Sorry for the interruption. Good. Another place that we might talk about the execution of the binding behavior is the pre-render step. In the sense of, remember, page load means we are going to call, or we are calling the components, whether they are controls or not, to be displayed in the front-end interface. But there is another step in the life cycle of a web page, which is the render, or the pre-render phase. The pre-render is the phase via which we translate the ASP.NET solutions into an HTML solution. Actually, this is trivial, and we define that nothing to be displayed in a web browser but HTML. We cannot display ASP.NET solutions. They have to be rendered into an HTML. So before rendering the ASP solutions into an HTML version, there we might do the binder. This is another place. And not only those two, remember that we said that we may go for an update, so we need an event handler like the button or like a label or something after a click or something like that. So we might talk about the binden statically set after an event to be launched or fired by the user. Simply, data to be transferred from the source to the control. From the source, data to be transferred from the source, database or a table or whatever, or list or something like that, to a control. The source here is not only database. The source here is not only database, but the source. It might be a list, a table, an array that programmatically generated, might be utilized to retrieve sources or data in order to be populated in a control in the front end. If you have any doubt, please ask. If you have any issue, you may ask anytime. You may interrupt me. Yeah. Great. Let's make it more easy. This context of populating a control using data binding, populating a control using a data binding. Let's take the example. I'll come back to this slide here, but let's take the example of, for example, this list box. A list box, it holds a list of values for the end user. I have, for example, in this example, test 1, test 2, test 3, and so on. If I click test 1, and if there is a button to submit, I would submit. How the computer would recognize that I clicked the test 1, not the test 2 or the test 3 or any other. I clicked exactly and specifically the test 1. How the computer will recognize that I clicked this value, not the other. Or for example, I'm going to click the test 5. How he would recognize that he clicked the 5, not the others. Because a control would be binded using two properties: the text field and the value field. The text field, it's what we see, and the value field, it's what the computer sees. Because here we might have similar values. Test 1, test 1, test 1, test 1, test 1, test 1. All of them, they are the same. We might, but this is what we visualize. But they are not on the same line. They are actually segregated, separate, let's say displayed one in a line. The computer will recognize them by his own value. So the text is what the user sees, and the value is what the computer sees. I ask you more specifically, how many users, your ID, for example, your student ID, how many users in the University of Nizwa have the same ID that you have in your card, in your University of Nizwa card? None. Only you. This is the example of an ID that this is an example of a value that the computer recognizes to identify you specifically. But your name, for example, Fatma. How many students in the University of Nizwa they are named Fatma? There are so many names. They are duplicated, but the ID never to be duplicated. Only one. This is what we are talking about. To bind a control, we need two properties. which are what the user sees, the data text field. What the computer sees is the data value field. Example ID. ID never to be duplicated, but the name it might be yes, might be no. It might be duplicated. Is it clear, please?
Yes.
Okay, that's great. That's great. All of them, they actually question of being binded. Actually, the bind or the bind process can be actually be applied on all of those controls, and those are also title of example only, not only those. Means those are the very famous and popular controls that we may refer uh, to do the bind process, but it's not only limited to this or to these controls. Other properties than the two properties we described earlier, which are the text and the value, they are not unique. Those are the very famous and pillar properties that we have to refer to in order to finalize the binding. But more than those two, the data text field and the data value field, more than those, we have more properties that we can find actually in the properties panel in the Visual Studio, or we might have actually them in the programmatic view, like so. We need them actually depends on the scenario. Do we have to define and declare and initialize them all once we are referring to the bind process? The answer is no. It depends on your context, it depends on the request, it depends on the question. All of them, they are constraints that you might stand on in order to see, do you need all of them or only those two, the text field and the value field? Do you need all properties to be defined, or you need only those two pillars, the text field and the data value field? So it depends on the question. Mainly we need those two. This is the list, the value field and the text field. This is the list number of properties that we might refer to in order actually list. Why? Because it's not an error if you don't do, but this is actually to make the service run properly. If you not fire an error, if we don't do them both, for example, we do only the text field, it will not fire an error. It will not cause an error in the program or the web solution. No, but it will not. Your solution will be running erroneously in the sense of it will run actually with an error. It will not do the solution correctly, but it will not show you any error. Everything is without error, but it will not. If you are calculating something, it will give you wrong numbers. If you are displaying IDs, it will display different IDs and so on. Because as we explained, as per the example we took earlier, to display a student profile, how many students we have in University of Lisbon named Fatma? We have so many. So if we click Fatma and we have only the text field is set, is binned. So which Fatma is going to be displayed? The computer will make an error. It will display different Fatma. But if we specify the ID, the computer will not make any error. You choose Fatma, the computer will see what is the ID of Fatma, and he will display the profile of Fatma. So because of those two, they are related, and they would help the user to know what value he's searching for, and the computer will specify exactly what value he has to search for. But if we need more than that, it depends on the context. Yes, we can refer to. Those are the properties. As an event handler, actually for a button, for example, as a control, we take the example of the button. What is the very common event handler for a button? It's the click, to click a button. Is it still valid, the click event, to be an event actually to be used as an event handler over a control like this? Let's say list control, list that has many values, like those examples here, the list examples here. The answer is yes, but it's not the best, because a list, it is not used to be clicked. It is used to select the value from. To select the value from. It's a list of values. You choose one. So the best, it's not unique. The best event handler for a list is the selected index changed. It's one of the very famous and very successful event handlers that we might refer to in order to finalize our code behind file with our appropriate commands. An example of bind in a list, we take the example of the bullets. We have our ASP solution. The ASP here is defined a user-defined list named bulleted list. This is user-defined name that has an ID and that has actually a text field and a value field. The ID is to launch the code behind, let's say, a file event handler, and those are what the user will see, the text field, and the data value field. This is what the value would be represented. Okay, so this is the ASP part. Okay, to display something like this, we need this ASP, and we need to populate the text from where? We have the texts here. So we are in the background file, and the code behind file, and the code behind file, and the code behind file, we declared a variable which is an array. And this array, user-defined URLs, we might name here Oman, or we might define, let's say, Nizwa, or we might define University of Nizwa, UON, whatever. It is up to us. It's user-defined name. If only we have to use it like it is. Okay, this array, how I knew it's an array? Because of those parentheses, those square parentheses. We have three values inside of this array. We have three values. How I knew? The comma before of its first value, the second comma before of its second value, and the last value, here it is. So we have three values. We have three values. Great. The first value, it has a text and it has URL. Second value, it has a text and it has a URL. The third value, it has a text and it has a URL. Great. Regarding the text, it would be utilized to populate the text field. Regarding the URL, it would be utilized to populate the value field. First value inside the array, the text is Google, and the URL is google.com. The text is Google, and the URL is google.com. See, it is underlined, it's in blue. So it is a URL. The second, the text is Bing with exclamation mark. Here we might actually, the text, it is all what we need to display to make the user see actually what the user would see. It is to be set here. We can write even in Arabic. Yes, we can write. We see that in the lab later on. And the URL is bing.com. Yes, and the third text is MSDN, and the URL is the MSDN Microsoft. So here we define that. But by doing this, would it be displaying this something like that? No, we have to bind. We have to do the bind. We have to do the bind. What does it mean? We have let me come back a little bit. We said to do the bind, we have to refer to those two components, which are to specify the data source and to call the method to do the binding. Two components. They have to be actually fired in order to finalize the binding. Let's see them, the data source and the method bind. After we created the variable that holds the value, and we created the structure, the ISP structure. Let's do the binding. Well, how? Specify the data source and call in the data bind method. This to specify that we are in the same file, in the same resource, in the same solution. Bulleted list menu. Here it is, the ID. Bulleted list menu. Bulleted list menu. The source for the data source for the bulleted list menu is this URLs. Which URLs? Is it this one? No, we said URL. See how it is written. The spelling. It is this one. This one. Great. So the source is the URLs. What is this URLs? It's the array. It's all of those values. Okay. Now what we do? We do the binding. Let's populate. So the text field first value Google, URL first value google.com. Text field second value Bing, value field second value bing.com, and so on. So we specify the source and we bind all. Finish. This is in the ASP part. This is in the code behind file, and this is what the user would see. What to be actually visualized in the front-end solution, front-end client. I give you just a few seconds to look here because we need it in the future, this solution here, to see if you have any doubt in this context. This is not new to us, this ASP. Actually, we saw this in the lab and we saw this in the first unit. We saw things like that. Remember, the user-defined names. I may here, can I change this ID name? Can I write Oman, for example? Yes, I can, absolutely, because it's user-defined. But if I write here Oman, here also I have to write Oman. Here also I have to write Oman, otherwise it will not run. It will not give error, but it will not populate, it will not display this thing. If I keep this, for example, here I don't change this one to Oman. It will not display this thing here. It will not, because the data bind method will not be called linked to Oman. It is linked to something different. Here we have Oman. We don't have data binding or bulleted list menu. So it is different. So it will not run, but it will not give error. It will not give error. It will not run. That's it. So have a look here very well and tell me if you have any doubt.
No.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so technically now let's talk a little bit about this data binding process and how it would be happening. We have actually two methodologies or two approaches via which we can tackle the binding, which is either we are going to populate a one value, for example, the student name. That's it. We need only to see the student name. That's it. Full stop. We need to see the student GPA. We need to see the student mark in the exam number one, for example. Only one value. Here we are going to tackle the single value binding process. We are going to go behind populating a one value only. For every student, we see his name only. That's it. Or we are going to display the student of the let's say the names one by one separately. We do not need a list. So since we are not in need of a list, we are going to tackle a single value. And this process is called a single value binding process. Yes. The other category, which is actually like the examples we are tackling here, we need a list of values. So here we are not going to tackle one value. We need all of the, for example, the student names, all of them. We are going to display the list of courses. We are going to display a list of, let's say, components, and so on. So all of them. So we need a list. Thus, we talk about a repeated value binding. The process we saw here, it's a repeated value binding. This example here, because we are displaying a list of texts with URLs. First, second, third, so on. The source here, it's not a database. It's an array that we defined here. The source, it's not a database. It's not an entity inside the database. It's an array that we use to have a list of values. It's our data source for this repeated value binding process. So in conclusion here, to finalize the binding, we either refer to the single value binding process or we refer to the repeated value binding process. Which one to choose? As we described, so if we are going to display only one value, for example, the name only, the course name only, the ID only, the mobile number only one value, only one single value. So we refer to single value binding process. We see the example. Or if we are going to display list of values, in the sense of list of student names, all of them, list of URLs, all of them, list of courses, all of them. So we need the repeated value process binding, not the single, because we need all of the resources. We'll tackle that actually in next class, inshallah. So for now, I'm going to stop here at this level.